I woke to a warmth that didn't belong to the sun. It was softer, slower, a heat that seemed to breathe against the curve of my shoulder, in and out, in perfect rhythm with my own. The first thing I noticed wasn't even the warmth, but the weight. Not heavy, just present. A kind of closeness you don't need to see to know it's there. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming. My mind told me I was alone, but my body knew better. I didn't move. I didn't dare. The sheets felt different. Not in how they were made, but how they were holding us together. The cotton seemed to trap his scent, faint but certain. That mix of clean soap and something deeper, like the quiet after rain. His hand wasn't touching me, but it was close. So close I could feel the air shifting between us, the faint rise of warmth from his skin. My own pulse seemed to lean toward it, aching for that tiny distance to disappear. The air in the room was thick, not from heat, but from something unsaid. I could feel the space between each of his breaths, the slight hesitation before the next one, as if he was memorizing this moment in the same way I was. I turned my head just slightly, and that's when I saw him. Malik, eyes still closed, lashes low against skin the color of rich coffee. His jaw set in that way it always was when he was trying not to think too hard. Even in sleep, he looked like he carried secrets. I couldn't help but watch the way his lips parted just enough with every exhale, the way his chest rose slow, steady, and sure. My gaze traced the shape of his arm, the line of his shoulder under the soft gray of his t-shirt. I'd never seen him this still before. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Malik was my tenant, nothing more. That's how it started, anyway. For months ago, he'd moved into the small unit in the back of my Toronto home. Said he needed quiet, a fresh start away from Atlanta. I didn't ask why. I didn't ask anything, really. But even then, I noticed him. I noticed the way his smile never quite reached his eyes, how he always looked at me a second longer than most men dared to. And now here he was, in my bed. I didn't remember him coming in. I didn't remember inviting him. But I remembered the way things had been changing between us. The small conversations in the kitchen that lasted longer than they needed to. I shifted just slightly under the sheet, and his breath hitched. His eyes opened, slow and unhurried, like he'd been waiting for me to notice. For a moment, neither of us said anything. There was no need. His gaze held mine, and it felt like something in the room shifted. The kind of shift you can feel in your stomach, in your chest, in the way your fingers start to itch with wanting to move closer. Malik's hand moved just a little, until the back of his knuckles brushed against my arm. It was the lightest touch, but my whole body reacted as if he'd spoken my name out loud. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, just breathing each other in. His eyes searched mine, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. If we moved now, everything would change. And then he did move. Slowly, like a tide coming in, his fingers trailed up from my arm to my shoulder, tracing the line of my collarbone as if it were something delicate. His touch was warm, steady, and so deliberate that I had to close my eyes for a moment, just to feel it fully. When his hand stopped, I opened my eyes again, and found him closer. His face was only inches from mine now. I could feel the way his breath mingled with mine, the slight tremor in it as he held himself back. It wasn't a kiss, not yet, but it was everything that comes before one. The anticipation, the pull, the electricity that makes every nerve in your body lean forward. And when his lips finally brushed mine, it wasn't rushed. It was slow, searching, almost careful, but it carried the weight of months of unspoken words. I don't know how long we stayed like that, touching without hurrying, letting the moment stretch until there was nothing else in the world but the warmth between us. His hand rested at the small of my back now, his thumb drawing soft circles that made my breath catch each time. Everything felt smooth, effortless, like we'd stepped into a rhythm we both already knew. And then, the sound. A single, sharp creak from the hallway, like a floorboard shifting under someone's weight. We both froze. His hand stilled against me, our eyes locking again. this time with a different kind of tension. My voice dropped to a whisper. And that's when I realized we weren't alone. Before I continue, I just want to thank all my amazing subscribers for keeping this channel alive. These stories take hours of writing, editing, and heart, and it's your likes, your comments, your shares that make it possible. If this story has already pulled you in, like this video, subscribe so we can keep this going. Share it with someone who still believes in the kind of love you can't reason with. And turn on that notification bell so you're first to feel the next one. I still remember the first time I saw him. It was a Tuesday afternoon, one of those days where the sky feels heavy but refuses to rain. I had just finished tidying the living room when I heard a knock at the door. When I opened it, there he was, Malik. He stood on my porch like he belonged there, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying nothing but a single duffel bag slung over one arm. His eyes caught mine and held, not in a polite, passing way. No, this was the kind of gaze that pauses the air between two people. I led him through the rental unit slowly, pointing out the kitchen, the small back porch, the sunlit bedroom. He didn't say much at first, just nodded, but I could feel his attention following me. Not just his eyes, but the weight of his presence. When he finally spoke, his voice had a low, velvety timbre, the kind that pulls you in without asking permission. And then he said my name, not like other people say it. He let it rest on his tongue just a little too long. I told myself I imagined it. After all, I'd only just come out of a cold, tired marriage. One where words were functional, never lingering. My heart wasn't ready for anything. And yet, there I was, feeling heat rise in my chest over a stranger's tone. The days after he moved in passed in soft, almost unnoticeable exchanges. But little things, they have a way of growing. It started in the kitchen. I'd be reaching for a glass, and he'd be right there beside me, close enough that the warmth from his arm brushed mine. Neither of us stepped away. We'd laugh at something small, the way he misread a label, or the time I burned toast because he distracted me with a story. And when the laughter faded, the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged. There was one night, I can't forget it. It was late, too late for anyone to still be in the kitchen. But I couldn't sleep, so I made tea. And there he was, leaning against the counter, as if the night had called us both. We talked about everything and nothing. Atlanta, where he'd just moved from. How he wanted a quieter life. I told him how silence had been my prison in my marriage, and how I was still learning to hear it differently now. At some point, we ended up at the small table by the window. He sat across from me, his knee brushing mine beneath the table. Just once, then again. Not an accident this time. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it felt like every word I spoke trembled at the edges. I found myself leaning forward, not because I couldn't hear him, but because I wanted to be closer. Close enough to catch that faint, clean scent of him. It wasn't cologne. It was just him. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, but neither of us moved to leave. My fingers curled around my cup, though I couldn't taste the tea anymore. I was too aware of the way his eyes lingered on me between sentences, as if he was memorizing the moment. Eventually, he stood. I thought he'd say goodnight, but instead, he just walked to the door, his hand resting briefly on the frame. And then he looked back. Not quickly, not casually. It was the kind of look that said more than words dared to. A look that reached past the night, past the silence, straight into whatever unspoken thing had been building between us. He didn't say goodbye, but he didn't have to. Tell me in the comments. Do you believe two people can feel something building between them without saying a single word? I read and reply to every comment. The night had swallowed the town in shadows, the kind of darkness that made even familiar rooms feel like strangers. Rain tapped against the windows in uneven rhythms, sometimes soft, sometimes wild, like a pulse that couldn't decide if it wanted to slow down or race. When the power cut out, it wasn't sudden. It was as if the house sighed into silence, leaving only the rain and the low thud of my heartbeat. I lit 2 candles, their small flames trembling as though they too felt the weight in the air. He was already on the couch, the blanket half pulled over him, waiting in that patient way he always did. Like he knew I'd join him, even before I decided to. I slipped under the blanket, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough to hear the shift in his breathing. We didn't speak at first. There was something sacred about the quiet, a space where the truth could live without being spoken. The rain softened, but the heat under the blanket did not. Every time the flame flickered, his face would appear and disappear in golden light, his eyes holding mine just long enough to make my chest tighten. I told myself I could lean back, keep a little distance. But when his knee brushed mine, and his hand settled casually near my fingers, I didn't move. Our knuckles touched, not enough to call it a hold, but enough to make the air between us shift. It was his voice that broke the quiet first. Low, steady, but threaded with something he didn't name. "Feels different tonight," he murmured. I wanted to ask different how, but I already knew. Everything in me knew. The rain picked up again, as though echoing my pulse. I turned my head toward him, and the candlelight caught the edge of his jaw, the curve of his mouth. Without thinking, my hand lifted, tracing the line of his face, slow, careful, as if the moment might vanish if I moved too quickly. His eyes fluttered closed, and the sound he made wasn't quite a sigh, but it sent something through me that no amount of distance could undo. We didn't rush. There was no need. Every second felt stolen from a clock that had stopped for us alone. My fingers brushed the collar of his shirt, the warm skin just beyond, and I felt him lean into me, closing what little space we'd left. "Tell me if you want me to stop," I whispered. "I won't," he said, and it wasn't defiance, it was truth. We leaned closer, breath meeting breath. The blanket slipped slightly, baring one shoulder, but neither of us fixed it. His hand found mine fully now, fingers interlocking like they'd been waiting their whole lives to learn the shape of each other. When his forehead touched mine, the world outside vanished. No rain, no candlelight, no shadows. Just him. The kind of closeness that made every other touch in my life feel like something I'd only imagined. And then his lips brushed mine. Once, barely there. It was enough to set every nerve alight. When we kissed again, it wasn't hurried or desperate. It was slow, deliberate, as if each movement was a vow we were too afraid to speak. The blanket fell further. My hands framed his face, my thumbs moving across his cheekbones. He kissed me deeper, and I felt it in every corner of me. My pulse was everywhere at once. In my fingertips, my throat, my ribs. Outside, the rain thundered. Inside, there was only the rhythm we made, the soft catch of breath, the quiet surrender that came when two people finally stopped pretending. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Time had no edges anymore. It was all one long, unbroken moment, until the knock came. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. We both froze, our eyes locking instantly. My lips were still tingling, my breath still unsteady. "We both knew who it might be," I whispered, the words tasting heavier than they should have. And neither of us wanted to face it. Before I go on, I need to say this. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. If you felt even one heartbeat in this story like it was your own, like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who understands forbidden love, and turn on notifications so you're first to feel the next one. It's strange how someone can quietly weave themselves into your days without asking permission. I told myself to keep my distance, that what had happened in the living room weeks ago, that lingering look, that too long brush of his hand, had been nothing. But nothing doesn't keep you awake at night. He was always there, not in a way I could accuse him of, just there. If the screen door creaked, he was on the porch before I could fetch a screwdriver. If my grocery bags felt heavier than usual, he was at the trunk, carrying them inside like he belonged here. One evening, I'd been reading in the kitchen, the house quiet except for the hum of the fridge. And then I heard his footsteps. He didn't ask if he could join me. He just poured himself a glass of water and sat down opposite me. It should have been ordinary, but the way he leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table, eyes fixed on me as if he could read the words I wasn't saying. It was anything but. We started talking about nothing. And somehow, nothing turned into everything. He told me about the dreams he'd left behind, because life got in the way. I told him about the parts of myself I'd buried so deep, I'd almost forgotten they existed. The conversation slowed, deepened, almost like the air between us had thickened, holding us there. "You ever feel," he said, his voice low, "like you're just waiting for your life to start?" I didn't mean to, but I nodded. And then he smiled. Not the casual kind I'd seen before, but the kind that feels like an unspoken promise. The kitchen felt smaller, warmer, like we were the only two people in the world. I could see the way the light caught in his eyes. I could hear the uneven rhythm of his breathing. And when he leaned closer, I didn't lean back. It wasn't supposed to happen. It wasn't supposed to feel like gravity had chosen him for me. His hand brushed mine. Just barely. But it was enough to send something racing through me that I didn't want to name. We were close enough now that I could feel the warmth of him. The moment stretched, fragile, like the pause before a single drop falls from a leaf. I could almost taste the decision we were about to make. And then the phone rang. The sharp, cold sound cut through everything, shattering the moment like glass. I jerked back, and he sat still for a second, jaw tightening, before leaning away. I answered it. My voice was too bright, too quick. Like if I spoke fast enough, I could outrun what had just almost happened. It was nothing important. But when I turned back, he was already standing, hands in his pockets, nodding as if the conversation we'd been having belonged to another lifetime. That night, I told myself I was lucky the phone had rung. I told myself that the pull between us would fade, that I would stop noticing the way he looked at me like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking for years. But I couldn't sleep. And maybe neither could he. Because just after midnight, I heard it. A soft knock on my bedroom door. I froze, my heart beating somewhere too high in my chest. And then, through the dark, I couldn't sleep. Be honest, if you were in my shoes that night, would you let him in? I'm reading every comment. I opened the door, and there he was. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His eyes had already crossed the threshold before his body did, stepping into my thoughts like he'd always belonged there. The air shifted the moment he appeared. It wasn't just colder from the night outside. It was heavier, warmer, a quiet weight that pressed between my ribs, telling me that whatever happened next would rewrite everything. I didn't tell him to come in. I didn't have to. He stepped past me like we both knew this was where he was meant to be, like there was nothing left outside for either of us. The door closed behind him with a sound that felt final, like a page turning. For a moment, we didn't move. We just looked at each other, his chest rising slowly, mine trying to match. I could hear my own pulse, loud in the silence, each beat daring me to take one more step toward him. And then we did. I don't remember who moved first. Maybe we both did. Maybe it was the air pulling us closer, or the way his gaze seemed to ask me a question I didn't have the courage to answer out loud. Our hands found each other like they'd been waiting in the dark. His fingers were warm, not just from his skin, but from something deeper, something that seeped into me and made my breath catch. It wasn't just his touch. It was the way he made the air feel different, as if every particle between us had been rearranged to belong only to this moment. The way my skin seemed to lean toward him, recognizing something my mind was still trying to deny. I could feel the nearness of him without him even closing the gap entirely. Every inch between us was electric, every breath like a quiet promise we weren't sure we should keep. When he did touch my face, it wasn't rushed. It was careful, almost reverent, as if he was memorizing the way I felt under his palm, so he could carry it with him forever. My eyes closed without permission. My chest ached with something that wasn't just desire. It was relief. Relief that I didn't have to pretend I didn't feel this anymore. We moved slowly, like we were afraid of startling the moment away. The distance between us dissolved in the space of a heartbeat, and then there was nothing left to cross. His forehead rested against mine. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say that our eyes weren't already whispering. When our lips finally met, it wasn't a spark. It was a tide. Slow, deep, unstoppable. Not an explosion, but a surrender. I could taste the quiet in him, the unspoken thoughts that had lived between us for far too long. I could feel the months of restraint unraveling in the way he breathed me in, the way his hands framed me as if he was afraid I might disappear. The world outside that room could have vanished, and I wouldn't have noticed. We moved together without hurry, as if the night had been made for us alone. His touch was a map, and I was the country he'd been trying to find. Every place he lingered felt claimed. It wasn't about hunger. Not anymore. It was about knowing. Knowing that this was the moment that would make every other feel pale in comparison. We sank into each other like the quiet after a storm, the kind that leaves the air smelling different, tasting different. I remember the sound of his breath at my ear. Slow, steady, almost like he was counting the seconds he could keep me close. And then, there was nothing but stillness. We stayed like that, wrapped in something that didn't need a name, until my thoughts began to blur and the edges of the room faded. Later, I lay awake while he slept beside me, his arm heavy across my waist, his face turned toward me like even in dreams, he couldn't let me go. The moonlight painted him in silver, softening the sharpness of his features, making him look almost unreal. I studied him as if it were the last time I'd see him. The way his lashes touched his cheek, the way his lips rested slightly parted, as if they'd fallen asleep mid-sentence. And I knew there was no going back. Something inside me had shifted. This wasn't a passing mistake, a stolen thrill. It was the kind of crossing you don't return from. When the sun finally began to spill through the curtains, the world felt unchanged. But I wasn't. And when the light reached us, neither of us reached for our clothes. If you've been with me through every heartbeat of this story, don't walk away now. Like this video so we can keep bringing you the kind of love you can't reason with. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Share this with someone who still believes in passion. And turn on that bell so you're first to feel it when it happens again.